Do you know who I am? I'm the chief of police of this county. Move this vehicle, right now! Richard Duval's voice cracked across the parking lot like a gunshot. His hand came down hard on Deborah Mosley Ward's shoulder, shoving her toward her own vehicle. Deborah didn't move. She didn't flinch, nor raise her voice. Her shoulders stayed level. The only thing that shifted was her eyes, which settled on Duval with a quiet, unblinking focus that had nothing in it resembling fear, and everything in it resembling patience. What Richard Duval didn't know was that he had just laid hands on the woman who would patiently assemble every piece of evidence needed to dismantle his career. Before continuing, comment where in the world you are watching from, and make sure to subscribe because tomorrow's story is one you can't miss. The cart rattled across the parking lot asphalt, one wheel stubborn and dragging, and Deborah Mosley Ward didn't mind one bit. It was Saturday. That was enough. She lifted the last 2 grocery bags into the back of her black Chevy Tahoe and let herself breathe. Really breathe. The kind she never got to do during the week. No case files, no briefings, no weight of other people's worst days pressing down on her shoulders. Just warm Georgia sunlight, the smell of fresh bread from one of the bags, and her daughter's voice filling the air like music. "Mom, are you even listening to me?" Deborah smiled without turning around. "You said Georgetown, Howard, and maybe Spelman if Dad's family stops guilt-tripping you about staying close." Zoe made a sound, half laugh, half groan, and dropped into the passenger seat. "Okay, you were listening." "I'm always listening." Deborah folded the cart to the side and moved to the driver's door, keys in hand. "I just look like I'm not. It's a skill. You'll need it someday." Zoe pulled her seatbelt across her chest and kept talking. About application essays, about wanting to study law, about whether it mattered which school she picked if she already knew what she wanted to do with her life. Her voice had that particular energy it got when she was excited, bright and fast and tumbling over itself. Deborah loved that sound more than almost anything in the world. She opened the back door to rearrange the bags so the eggs weren't under the orange juice. 40 seconds, maybe. She wasn't in any rush. It was Saturday. That's when she heard it. Honk. Short. Sharp. Like a period at the end of a sentence nobody asked for. Deborah glanced up. A silver Ford F-250 sat directly behind her, blinker on, waiting for her spot. Behind the wheel, barely visible through the glare on the windshield, was the outline of a large man. She went back to the bags. Honk. Honk. Longer this time. Impatient. Deborah didn't speed up. She set the eggs where they belonged, made sure nothing was going to shift on the drive home, and stood up straight. Zoe was still talking about Georgetown's law program when Deborah gently closed the back door and moved toward the driver's side. Unhurried, unbothered. She had just reached for the handle when the truck door flew open. Heavy footsteps hit the pavement, the kind that expected the ground to get out of the way. Deborah turned. The man coming toward her was big, barrel-chested, thick through the shoulders, somewhere in his late 50s. His face was already red before he opened his mouth, the color of someone who spent a lot of time being angry and had stopped noticing it. He wore a dark blue pullover and khaki pants, and he moved through that parking lot like every inch of it belonged to him. Deborah watched him come. She didn't step back. She didn't step forward. She just stood there between her car door and the open Georgia air, grocery bag still in hand, and waited. Zoe's voice went quiet behind the windshield. The man stopped close, too close, and looked Deborah up and down. Not quickly, slowly. The way some people look at something they've already decided has no value. His eyes moved to the Tahoe. He let them sit there for a moment, on the clean black paint, the tinted windows, the size of it. Something shifted in his expression. A small thing, a telling thing. "You gonna be much longer?" he said. Not a question, really. More like the first move in a game he'd already decided he was going to win. Deborah kept her voice level. "Just finishing up." "Just finishing up," he repeated. And there it was, that particular flavor of contempt that didn't need volume to land. "You know, some people got places to be." Deborah said nothing. She reached for the driver's door handle. "Hey!" His voice went up a notch. "Hey, I'm talking to you." She looked at him. His jaw was set. His chest was puffed. His whole body was broadcasting one message, loud and clear, that he was used to people moving when he wanted them to move, and her stillness was something close to an insult. The Saturday morning noise carried on around them. Shopping carts, car engines, a child laughing somewhere near the entrance. And through the windshield, Zoe had gone completely still. The man took one more step forward and opened his mouth. "You think this is funny?" His voice cracked across the parking lot like a whip. A woman pushing a cart nearby flinched. A teenage boy loading bags into a sedan looked up fast. Deborah didn't flinch. She didn't look away. "I don't think anything is funny," she said. Calm, quiet. The kind of quiet that had nothing to do with weakness. The man's face went a shade darker. "Then why are you still standing there? I've been waiting." "Some of us have actual schedules to keep." He said the last part slowly, like he was explaining something to someone who wasn't quite smart enough to understand it the first time. Deborah held his gaze. "I'll be out of your way in a moment." "A moment?" He laughed, short and ugly. "A moment? That's rich." He took another step forward, close enough now that she could smell the coffee on his breath. His eyes moved to the Tahoe again. The same slow, deliberate look as before. "What is this, anyway? You borrow this thing?" The words landed exactly the way he meant them to. Deborah said nothing. "Because this is a nice lot," he continued, his voice carrying now, loud enough for the people nearby to hear every word. "Nice neighborhood. People around here work hard for what they've got." He paused, letting that sit. Just saying. Behind him, a small crowd had started to gather, not rushing over, but slowing down, stopping. The way people do when they can feel something ugly building in the air. A young couple near the cart return. An older black woman in a church hat who'd just come out of the pharmacy. Lara Clark, a retired school teacher in a denim shirt, grocery bags hanging from both arms, who stopped walking entirely and reached into her purse for her phone without a word. Zoe's window was up. Deborah could still see her face. Her daughter was 17 years old, and she was trying very hard not to look scared. She was failing. Something moved through Deborah's chest. Not panic, not rage. Something colder and more focused than either of those things. The man took one more step and put his hand on her shoulder. Not a tap, not an accident, a grip. "I'm talking to you," he said. "When someone's waiting, you move. That's how this works. Or did nobody ever teach you that?" Deborah looked down at his hand, then back up at his face. "Remove your hand," she said. He didn't. "You want to make a scene?" His voice rose further, filling the space between the cars, bouncing off hoods and windows. "Fine, we'll make a scene. You want to stand here and act like you own the place? In this lot? With this car?" He shook his head, his lip curling. "I don't know what kind of game you think you're playing, sweetheart, but let me tell you something." "Then tell me," Deborah said, still quiet, still steady. "Who are you?" That stopped him for exactly 1 second. Then, the last of whatever restraint he'd been pretending to have fell away completely. He pulled himself up to full height, all 230 pounds of him, and looked at her like she had just said the most ridiculous thing he had ever heard in his 58 years on the planet. "Do you know who I am?" His voice boomed across the lot now. Heads turned from 20 feet away. 30. I am the chief of police of this county. I have been in law enforcement for 30 years. 30 years. And I will have your car towed, your day completely ruined, and you crying to somebody who won't care." He leaned in, close enough that she could see the broken capillaries across his nose. "So you need to move this vehicle. Right now." The parking lot had gone quiet. Not silent. Cars still moved on the far end. A shopping cart rattled somewhere behind them, but the people nearby had stopped pretending they weren't watching. Phones were up. Lara Clark's was already recording, arms steady, expression unreadable. And through the windshield, Zoe sat frozen in the passenger seat. Her hands were in her lap. Her eyes were wide. She looked exactly like what she was. A teenager watching a large, furious man loom over her mother in a public parking lot, while a crowd of strangers watched and did nothing. Deborah saw her daughter's face. And then Deborah reached slowly into her jacket. Her hand moved slowly, deliberately, the way you only move when you know exactly what you're doing, and you need everyone watching to see that you know it. She reached into her jacket and pulled out a black credential wallet. She held it open in front of his face. Not shoved at him, not waved around. Steady, level, like she had done it 1,000 times before, because she had. "My name is Deborah Mosley Ward." Her voice was clear and unhurried. "I am a special agent in charge with the Federal Bureau of Investigation." She let that land. "Step back, Chief Duvall." The parking lot held its breath. For one long moment, Richard Duvall just stared at the badge. The gold caught the morning light. The seal was unmistakable to anyone who had spent 30 years in law enforcement. And he had. Then he laughed. Not a nervous laugh. Not an unsure laugh. A real one. Short and dismissive. Punched out through his nose like the whole thing was beneath him. FBI. He said it the way you'd say, "Sure you are," to a child claiming to be an astronaut. "That right." He snatched the credential wallet out of her hand. Not reached for it. Snatched it. Hard and fast, like it was his to take, like she was nobody who could stop him. "Let me see that." He was already flipping it open, squinting at it, turning it sideways, performing skepticism for the crowd, the way men like him performed everything. Like his doubt was automatically more valid than her reality. Deborah's voice stayed flat. "That is federal property. Return it." "I'll return it when I'm satisfied it's real." He looked up at her over the wallet with something close to a sneer. "Because any fool can print a badge off the internet these days." A murmur moved through the crowd. Lara Clark shifted her phone angle slightly to capture his hands holding the credentials. "Chief Duvall." Deborah kept her eyes on him. "I am giving you one final opportunity to return my credentials and step back." He looked at her for a long moment. Then he grabbed her wrist. His hand clamped down hard. Not a touch, not an accident. A deliberate grip meant to control, to move her, to remind her in front of every person watching exactly who he believed had power in this parking lot. "Now you listen to me," he started. He didn't finish. Deborah's response was immediate and completely professional. The moment his hand locked around her wrist, she was already moving, her body turning into his, using his own grip and his own weight against him. One pivot, one controlled push. And Richard Duvall, Chief of Police of Harwick County, 30-year law enforcement veteran, went face down against the trunk of her black Tahoe, with both arms pinned behind his back before he could process what was happening. Her credentials landed on the trunk beside him, snapped shut. The crowd erupted. Gasps, startled shouts, the frantic shuffle of people stepping back. Duvall grunted hard against the metal. He tried to push up. She held him without effort. "Don't," she said quietly. He stopped moving. Lara Clark kept filming. Her arms didn't shake. Her expression didn't change. She just stood there in her denim shirt with her grocery bags on the ground beside her feet, and made sure every single second of it was captured, including the moment Duval grabbed Deborah first. Deborah leaned down slightly, her voice low and professional and completely without drama. "Richard Duval, you are being detained for assault of a federal officer. You have the right to remain silent. I strongly advise you exercise it." She recited the rest of his rights in the same steady tone, not performing for the crowd, not savoring the moment, just doing her job, the way she always did. The crowd had gone from gasping to completely, utterly still. Then someone started clapping. One person, somewhere to the left. Then another. Then the older black woman in the church hat pressed both hands to her mouth and closed her eyes like she was saying a quiet prayer of thanks. Inside the Tahoe, Zoe let out a breath she had been holding for 3 full minutes. Her shoulders dropped. The terror on her face broke open into something that wasn't quite a smile. Stunned and shaky and real. Deborah saw it through the windshield. "Good," she thought. "That's my girl." Duval was breathing hard against the trunk, his face turned sideways, cheek pressed to the black paint. His pullover was bunched up around his shoulders. All that size, all that volume, all that certainty. And he was lying on the back of her car, while strangers filmed him on their phones. "You have no idea," he started. "You were advised to remain silent," Deborah said. He went quiet. She kept one hand on his wrists and reached for her phone with the other to make the federal notification call. Around her, the crowd stood and watched. Nobody left. Nobody looked away. And then, from somewhere on the far side of the lot, the sound cut through everything else. Sirens. Not 1. 3. Deborah looked up. 3 Harwick County patrol cars were coming fast. Too fast. Weaving through the lot's traffic with lights flashing. She clocked the response time automatically, the way she always did. Someone had called this in before she ever had Duval secured. The first patrol car hadn't even stopped moving before the officer was out. Young, white, hand already on his weapon, eyes locked on Deborah, on her hands, on Duval pinned against the trunk, on the crowd of civilians with their phones up. He processed none of that correctly. He saw one thing and made one decision. "Hey! Hey! Get your hands where I can see them! Now!" The command was aimed at Deborah. She didn't move off Duval. She didn't flinch. She turned her head toward the officer slowly and deliberately, making sure her movements were visible and readable from every angle being filmed. "I am Special Agent in Charge Deborah Mosley Ward, Federal Bureau of Investigation." Her voice was loud enough to carry, to the officer, to the 2 more jumping out of their cars behind him, to every phone still recording. "My credentials are on the trunk. The man I am detaining physically grabbed my wrist in front of approximately 30 witnesses. I am a federal officer performing a lawful detention." The second officer arrived at a jog. Older. He looked at the man on the trunk, and his face changed. He recognized Duval. "Chief?" His voice went up. "Chief Duval?" The gun didn't come out of its holster, but his hand dropped to it. His eyes moved to Deborah, with something that had already made up its mind. The situation was a lit match held over dry grass. Deborah kept her hands exactly where they were, and kept talking. "My federal credentials are on the trunk of this vehicle. The man you are looking at grabbed my wrist after refusing to return federal property he took from my hand. This entire incident has been recorded by multiple bystanders from the beginning. I am asking you to stand down and allow me to complete this detention." Nobody moved. 3 officers. 2 with hands on weapons. 1 with his drawn and pointed at a federal agent in a parking lot full of witnesses. Somewhere in the crowd, a woman said, "Oh my God," in a low, horrified voice. Then Duval spoke. "Stand down!" His voice came out flat and controlled, muffled slightly by the angle of his face against the trunk. All that fury from 60 seconds ago. Gone. Packed away somewhere cold and calculating. "Stand down," he said again. "All of you." The officers hesitated. Then they stepped back. Weapons lowered. Deborah released Duval's wrists and straightened up. She picked her credentials off the trunk and returned them to her jacket. Duval pushed himself upright slowly, like a man who was choosing his pace deliberately, refusing to let anyone see effort in it. He turned around. His face had changed. The red was still there, but the rage beneath it had reorganized itself into something quieter and considerably more dangerous. He smoothed his pullover down with both hands. He looked at the crowd, at the phones, at Lara Clark still recording, and his jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. Then he looked at Deborah. "You want to tell me your name again?" he said quietly, like they were having a private conversation. "You heard it," Deborah said. Something moved behind his eyes, a calculation. She watched him arrive at a number. Mosley Ward. He let the name sit in his mouth for a moment. "All right." He nodded slowly, the way men nod when they're filing something away for later. "All right." He took one step closer, close enough that his voice dropped below the range of even the nearest microphone. "You just made the worst mistake of your career." He said it without heat. That was what made it land. "I know people you haven't met yet, and by tomorrow morning, they're going to know your name a whole lot better than you want them to." Deborah looked at him steadily. "Are you threatening a federal officer, Chief Duval?" He smiled. It didn't reach anything above his mouth. "I'm just talking," he said. "Isn't that what we're doing?" He turned, nodded once to his officers, and walked back to his truck. No hurry, no stumble. He pulled open the door, climbed in, and drove out of the parking lot at a perfectly normal speed while 30 people watched him go. No arrest, no cuffs. He simply left. His officers exchanged a long look. Then they got back in their cars. Deborah stood in the middle of the parking lot, badge in her jacket, crowd still watching. Zoe's face pale behind the windshield. The video was already uploading to a dozen different phones. She had won the moment. She could already feel it slipping. Deborah got them home without talking about it. That was the agreement. Unspoken. The way most agreements between mothers and daughters who know each other well tend to be. Zoe asked 2 questions on the drive. Deborah answered both with short, steady sentences and a hand briefly squeezed over her daughter's. The parking lot would get discussed. Just not yet. Not while Deborah's mind was still running the numbers. Dinner was quiet. Deborah made pasta. Simple, fast. And they sat across from each other at the kitchen table while the evening news played low on the television in the next room. Neither of them looked at it. "Are you in trouble?" Zoe asked. She was pushing a piece of penny around her bowl, not eating it. "No," Deborah said. "I did everything right." "I know you did." Zoe looked up. "That's not what I asked." Deborah set her fork down and looked at her daughter, this sharp, perceptive, nearly grown person who had inherited her father's eyes and her mother's ability to see through any answer that wasn't the whole truth. "I don't know yet," Deborah said, "but I'm going to handle it." Zoe nodded and went back to her pasta. She understood that was all she was getting tonight. She had grown up in this house. She knew what I'm going to handle. It meant coming from her mother's mouth. It meant exactly what it said. And it meant the conversation was closed. After dinner, Zoe hugged her at the sink, held on a moment longer than usual, and went upstairs. Deborah waited until she heard her daughter's bedroom door close. Then she sat down at the kitchen table, opened her work laptop, and pulled up a secured federal file she had not touched all day. The file was thick. 3 months of work, built carefully and quietly inside a federal investigation that almost nobody outside her immediate team knew existed. The header read, Harwick County Police Department. Pattern or practice investigation. Civil Rights Division. She scrolled through it slowly. 47 documented traffic stops, all within a 3-mile stretch of road, all involving black drivers, spanning 18 months. Complaint after complaint filed with the department's Internal Review Board, and dismissed. 3 civil lawsuits settled out of court, all with non-disclosure agreements attached, all paid out of county funds without a single officer facing discipline. Witness statements from black residents who had finally agreed, after months of Deborah's careful and patient work, to go on federal record about what Duvall's department had been doing to them for years. It was a real case, a strong case, the kind that ended careers and changed departments and meant something lasting for the people who had been brave enough to put their names on it. And tonight, for the first time, Deborah was looking at it differently. She leaned back in her chair and stared at the ceiling. In the parking lot this morning, she had done everything right. Duvall had grabbed her. She had defended herself. 30 witnesses and multiple cameras had captured every second of it. By any measure, the morning had ended with her standing and him on the ground, and that should have been the end of it. But Duvall had said something before he walked away. I know people you haven't met yet. Deborah had heard variations of that line her entire career. Powerful men saying powerful things on their way out the door. She had never lost sleep over it before. Tonight was different. Because if Duvall started pulling on threads, if someone in his network started looking at who exactly Deborah Mosley Ward was and what she had been working on, they were going to find this file. And when they did, they weren't going to see a federal agent who was assaulted in a parking lot by a man she had never personally met. They were going to see an agent who had been secretly building a case against that exact man for 3 months. Duvall's attorneys would have their narrative written by Monday afternoon. She hadn't been assaulted by a stranger. She had engineered a confrontation with a target. The whole thing was a setup. The investigation was tainted. 3 months of work. 3 months of earned trust from witnesses who had every reason not to trust anyone, would be handed to a defense attorney on a silver platter. Deborah closed the laptop. She pressed both palms flat on the table and breathed. She didn't sleep that night. Sunday was quiet and careful. She spent it alone with the files, reviewing, not contacting anyone officially, waiting. By Sunday evening, her name still hadn't appeared in any of the news coverage. The headline running on every major network showed the parking lot footage beneath the words, FBI agent detains off-duty police chief in parking lot confrontation. She turned the television off and went to bed. Monday was going to detonate. She could already hear it coming. Deborah dressed carefully on Monday morning. Not because she needed armor. She never needed armor. But because she understood what the day was going to ask of her, and she intended to meet it looking exactly like what she was. She chose a charcoal blazer, pressed slacks, and low heels. She pinned her badge to her belt. She drank her coffee standing at the kitchen counter, checked her phone once, and drove to the Atlanta field office in silence, with the radio off. She needed to think. By the time she pulled into the parking garage, she had already run through 17 different versions of how the morning could go. She picked the most likely one and walked in prepared for it. She didn't make it to her desk. Mosley Ward. The front desk assistant caught her the moment she cleared the security doors. Young woman. Apologetic eyes. Deputy Director Bloom is asking for you. Right now. Deborah nodded like she had expected it, because she had. Greg Bloom's office was on the 4th floor, corner facing east. Big windows. Good light on days when the light felt like something to be grateful for. Today, the blinds were half drawn, and Bloom was standing behind his desk rather than sitting at it. which told Deborah everything she needed to know about how he had spent his weekend. He looked tired. Genuinely, deeply tired. The way a man looks when he's been fielding calls he didn't want to receive from people he couldn't ignore. "Close the door," he said. She did. "Sit down." "I'll stand," she said. Not defiance, just efficiency. Standing meant she could leave faster when this was over. Bloom looked at her for a moment, then let it go. He picked up a single sheet of paper from his desk, looked at it briefly, and set it back down like he didn't need to read it again. "The office has been receiving calls since Saturday evening," he said. "The AG's office reached out Sunday morning. I had a congressional staffer on the phone before 9 o'clock. And there have been other calls." He paused. "From parties I am not yet at liberty to name." Deborah kept her face still. And the Office of Professional Responsibility has been formally asked to open a review." He said it quickly, like speed would soften it. "The question on the table is whether your ongoing investigation into the Harwick County Police Department constitutes a conflict of interest given Saturday's public incident." The room was very quiet. Deborah had known this was coming. She had run this exact scenario at the kitchen table at 2 in the morning. Knowing it was coming didn't make hearing it any easier. "The investigation was opened 3 months before any contact with Duval," she said. "The timeline is documented and airtight. I know that. Duval grabbed my wrist on camera in front of 30 witnesses. I defended myself and performed a lawful detention." "I know that too, Deborah." Bloom's voice was tired but firm. He wasn't arguing with her. He was delivering news he didn't want to deliver. "None of that changes what I have to do right now. Until OPR completes their review, you are suspended from active field operations. Effective immediately." She looked at him. "Your case files are not being touched," he added quickly. "The investigation remains open. Merlin maintains access. Nothing is compromised yet. But you are off active status until we get a clean ruling. Yet." That word sat in the air between them like smoke. "Who made the request?" Deborah asked. "The OPR review. Who specifically made the request?" Bloom held her gaze. He didn't answer. He didn't need to. The silence was its own answer, and it told her the reach was longer than a county commissioner and a department attorney. Someone had made a phone call to someone who had made a phone call, and that chain had traveled far enough up the ladder that Bloom couldn't say the name out loud in his own office. Deborah picked up her bag from the chair beside her. "I'll expect the OPR contact in writing," she said. "It'll be on your personal email within the hour." She nodded once and walked out, past the assistants, past the analysts at their desks who were carefully studying their screens, past her own office door, which she did not stop at. She collected her personal items in under 4 minutes, walked back through the security doors, and called Merlin from the parking garage before she reached her car. He picked up on the first ring. "They benched me," she said. "Keep working. Document everything." She ended the call, got in the Tahoe, and drove home in silence. Deborah didn't sleep well Sunday night. She didn't sleep well Monday night either. By Tuesday morning, she had stopped pretending the bed was doing her any good. She was up before 5, coffee made, television on, watching 3 different news channels simultaneously from the couch, with her laptop open on the cushion beside her. She had done this for 20 years on difficult cases, spread the inputs wide, look for the pattern, find where the story was being built. The story was being built fast. It had started sometime Monday afternoon, subtle at first, the way these things always started. A single statement from a law firm Deborah didn't recognize, posted to a local Atlanta news site. She had found it while Bloom was still talking. Richard Duval, a decorated 30-year law enforcement veteran and chief of police of Harwick County, was subjected to a hostile and unprovoked physical assault by an off-duty federal agent during a routine parking dispute on Saturday morning. Chief Duval is currently consulting with legal counsel and asks that the public reserve judgment until all facts are known. Unprovoked. She noted the word, filed it. By Monday evening, the statement had been picked up by 2 local television stations. By Tuesday morning, it was everywhere. She watched a talk radio host out of Atlanta, loud, red-faced, the kind of man who treated his microphone like a weapon, spend 40 minutes painting a picture of a federal agent with a chip on her shoulder who had physically attacked an unarmed man for honking at her in a parking lot. He didn't use her name. He didn't need to. Some FBI agent, he kept saying. Some agent who thinks her badge means she can put her hands on a decorated officer of the law. The callers agreed enthusiastically. Deborah drank her coffee and watched and took notes. Then she switched channels and watched a different host, this one calmer, more measured, raise what he called reasonable questions about federal overreach and whether off-duty FBI agents should be engaging in physical confrontations with local law enforcement officials over parking spaces. Parking spaces? Like, that's what this was. She noted that framing, too. By 9 o'clock, she had identified the architecture of it, who was talking, what language they were all using, where the key phrases had originated. Hostile encounter, unprovoked, parking dispute, the same 3 terms appearing across outlets that had no obvious connection to each other. That kind of coordination didn't happen organically. Someone was working phones. Someone was feeding language to friendly voices and letting those voices carry it forward. Patrick Osborne. She was certain of it before she finished her second coffee. She was pulling up the county commissioner's public financial disclosures when Merlin called. She answered immediately. "Talk to me." His voice was tight in the way she recognized, controlled, professional, but carrying something underneath it that he was working to keep steady. "I need you to hear this before it publishes. A local reporter contacted the field office about 40 minutes ago, seeking comment on an ongoing federal investigation." He paused. "A civil rights investigation into the Harwick County Police Department." Deborah set down her mug. "He had the broad strokes," Merlin continued. "Not the evidence, not the witness names, not the case details. But he knows the investigation exists. He knows it predates Saturday, and he knows it's yours." Another pause. "The story publishes tomorrow morning." The television murmured in the background. A scrolling chyron. Somewhere outside a car drove past with its music up. Deborah stood very still in the middle of her living room. She understood immediately, completely, and with cold precision, what the leak meant. It wasn't a reporter who had stumbled onto a story. It was a message delivered through a reporter. Duval's network hadn't just moved to protect him in the press. They had found the investigation. And rather than trying to kill it quietly, they were going to use it as a weapon. She could already see the headline. She could already see the narrative it would hand to every talk radio host and defense attorney within 100 miles. FBI agent had secret investigation into police chief for months, then confronted him in a parking lot. Set up. Vendetta. Predetermined conclusion. The confrontation wasn't something that happened to her. It was something she manufactured. "Deborah." Merlin's voice brought her back. "What do you want me to do?" She picked up her mug, set it in the sink, looked out the kitchen window at the ordinary Tuesday morning outside. "Keep building," she said, "strictly within your authority. Document every single thing, Terrence, every call, every contact, every move they make." She paused. "And find out who talked." She hung up and stared at the window for a long moment. Then she went and got dressed. She had a drive to make. Deborah read the story standing up. She hadn't planned it that way. She'd come downstairs Wednesday morning intending to sit, to drink her coffee slowly, to be deliberate. But when the notification hit her phone at 6:47 a.m. and she opened the article, something about the headline made sitting down feel impossible. FBI agent behind viral video had secret Duval investigation underway for months. She read it twice, then a third time. Not because it was hard to understand. It was written to be understood immediately, by everyone, in the worst possible way. But because she was cataloging every word choice, every framing decision, every carefully placed question mark that did the work of an accusation without technically being one. The reporter had the basics right. Federal investigation, civil rights focus, Harwick County PD, Deborah Mosley Ward, special agent in charge. 3 months of work predating Saturday's confrontation. What the reporter did with those facts was something else entirely. The article didn't say Deborah had manufactured the parking lot incident. It was too careful for that. Instead, it asked questions. Reasonable questions. Was it possible that an agent with an active investigation had allowed a personal confrontation to escalate unnecessarily? Was the physical takedown of a senior law enforcement official justified by a wrist grab? Or was something else driving the agent's response? Why had the investigation remained undisclosed to county officials? Every question was a blade. Every blade pointed the same direction. Zoe appeared at the bottom of the stairs in her school uniform, backpack over one shoulder, and stopped when she saw her mother's face. "Mom!" "Eat breakfast," Deborah said. "I'll drive you." She kept her voice even all the way to school. She kept it even on the drive back. She was pulling into her driveway when her phone rang. Mayor Phoebe Minor's personal cell number on the screen. Deborah sat in the car and answered. "Deborah." The mayor's voice was low and careful. She sounded like a woman choosing every word before she released it. "I want you to know that I have seen the article, and I do not, for 1 single second, believe." Mayor Minor. Deborah kept her own voice pleasant. "What can I do for you?" A pause, the careful kind. "I want to help. I genuinely do. But I need you to understand the position I'm in right now. The county council is already calling. Commissioner Osborne has formally requested a public statement from my office regarding the investigation. And with the OPR review pending," she stopped, collected herself. "I cannot publicly defend you right now. The political environment is too volatile. I need more time to see how this develops." Deborah listened to all of it without interrupting. "I appreciate the call," she said when the mayor finished. "I understand your position." She ended the call, got out of the car, and went inside. She stood in the kitchen for a moment, looking at nothing in particular. The mayor wasn't malicious. Deborah knew that. Phoebe Minor was a woman who had spent 20 years navigating a political world designed to limit her, and she had survived it by learning when to move and when to wait. Deborah understood that calculus. Understanding it didn't make it feel any less like being left in the open. She changed into comfortable clothes, packed a bag, and drove south on I-75 for 90 minutes until the highway gave way to the quieter roads of Bibb County. Her mother's house was a single-story brick home on a tree-lined street in Macon. The same house Deborah had grown up in, the same creaky front step, the same wind chimes on the porch that her father had hung 30 years ago. Lucy Mosley opened the door before Deborah knocked. "I saw the news," her mother said. No preamble, no softening. She stepped aside to let Deborah in. They sat at the kitchen table with sweet tea and the television off, and Lucy listened to everything. The parking lot, the benching, the leak, the article, the mayor's call. She listened the way she had always listened, without interruption, without visible alarm, with the particular steady patience of a woman who had seen a great deal of the world's machinery up close. When Deborah finished, Lucy was quiet for a long moment. "They always find a way to make you the problem, baby," she finally said. "That's the first move. Always has been." She folded her hands on the table. "The question is whether you let them make it the story." Deborah looked at her mother. "They won't," she said. Lucy nodded once. Like that settled it. She got up and refilled both glasses. Deborah drove back to Harwick County that evening with her jaw set and something solid rebuilt in her chest. She called Merlin the moment she hit the highway. "Keep building," she said. "Everything by the book. I'll be ready." The call came on a Thursday morning, 2 weeks after the parking lot. Deborah was in the kitchen when her phone rang. Standing at the counter in sweatpants and a worn Howard University t-shirt, second cup of coffee going cold beside her laptop. She had been staring at the same paragraph of case notes for 20 minutes without reading it. She looked at the screen. OPR, Office of Professional Responsibility. She set down her mug and answered. "Agent Mosley Ward." The voice was formal, unhurried, neither warm nor cold. A man reading from a conclusion he had already written. "This is Senior Reviewer Callahan from the Office of Professional Responsibility. I'm calling regarding the Conflict of Interest review opened 14 days ago in connection with your involvement in the Harwick County federal investigation." "I'm listening," Deborah said. "The review is complete." A brief pause, the kind that comes before words the speaker wants to land properly. After a full examination of case origination records, documented timelines, field office authorization logs, and agent conduct history, this office has found no basis for a conflict of interest determination. The Harwick County Pattern or Practice investigation was formally opened and authorized 3 months prior to any personal contact between yourself and Chief Richard Duvall. Your conduct on the date of the incident was consistent with federal officer protocol. Another pause. You are reinstated to full active status, effective immediately. Deborah exhaled through her nose. "Thank you," she said. "I'll expect the written ruling within the hour." "It's already in your inbox," he said, and hung up. She stood at the counter for a moment with the phone in her hand. Outside the kitchen window, the neighborhood was going about its Thursday morning. A dog walker on the sidewalk, a FedEx truck easing down the street, 2 kids on bikes cutting through the school shortcut. All of it ordinary. All of it entirely indifferent to the 2 weeks she had just lived through. She called Merlin first. He picked up before the first ring finished. "We're back," she said. He let out a breath that sounded like it had been held for 14 days. "When do you want to come in?" "Tomorrow morning. First thing." She paused. "Tonight, I'm taking my daughter to dinner." Zoe picked the restaurant, a Caribbean place they both loved, 20 minutes from the house, with jerk chicken that had been making Deborah close her eyes since the first time she tried it 8 years ago. They got their usual corner table. They ordered too much food. Zoe wore the yellow dress she saved for occasions she considered worth celebrating, which Deborah noted without comment, and loved without reservation. They talked for 2 hours. Not about the case, not about Duvall or OPR, or leaked investigations, or talk radio hosts who didn't know her name. They talked about Zoe's college essay, which had gone through 4 drafts and was finally, in Zoe's words, actually good. They talked about a teacher at school who had started a civil rights law elective that Zoe was already dominating. They argued amiably about whether Howard or Spellman had the better law program feeder record, a conversation they had been having for 6 months with no resolution in sight and no desire to find one. At some point, Zoe looked across the table and said, quietly, "I was really scared." "In the parking lot." Deborah looked back at her. "I know you were. You weren't. I was trained not to show it." Zoe considered that. "Were you actually scared? Or were you just ready?" Deborah thought about it honestly before she answered. "Both," she said. "Both at the same time. That's what 20 years looks like." Zoe nodded slowly. Then she picked up her fork and went back to her rice. And Deborah watched her daughter think that over with the focused quiet of someone filing it somewhere important. They drove home with the windows down. Deborah arrived at the field office at 7 the next morning. early enough that the parking garage was still half empty, and the building carried that particular pre-coffee quiet she had always preferred. She badged through the security doors, nodded to the overnight desk agent, and walked to her office for the first time in 2 weeks. Merlin was already there, waiting in the chair across from her desk. His expression stopped her in the doorway. "What happened?" she said. Not a question. He turned his laptop around without a word and showed her the Federal Server Access Log. 3 witness statement files, the human foundation of the entire civil rights case, accessed 4 days ago. Deborah walked to the desk, leaned forward, and read the log entry twice. The files had not been misfiled. They had not been corrupted by a system error. They had been deliberately, carefully, completely deleted. Deborah didn't move for a long moment. She stood behind her desk with both hands flat on the surface, reading the access log on Merlin's laptop screen. The timestamp, the credentials used, the file names, 3 of them, all witness statements, all gone. She read it a second time the way she read everything that mattered. Slowly, completely, looking for the thing that wasn't immediately obvious. There wasn't one. It was exactly as bad as it looked. She straightened up. "Pull the credentials." Merlin was already typing. "Belonged to a junior analyst. Kenny Davis, 29 years old, been in the field office 11 months. He paused. He had legitimate server access, knew the file architecture, knew exactly where to look. Deborah pulled her chair out and sat down. Background. "Running it now." Merlin's eyes moved across the screen. The office was still quiet around them, early enough that most of the floor hadn't filled yet, which Deborah was grateful for. She needed to think before this became a building-wide conversation. The background check took 4 minutes. Merlin stopped typing. Deborah watched his face change, that particular stillness that came over him when he found something he didn't want to find. He turned the laptop around slowly. She read the familial connection section. Kenny Davis. Mother's maiden name. Osborne. Patrick Osborne, County Commissioner of Harwick County. The man who had been running Duval's media operation since the morning after the parking lot was Kenny Davis's uncle. The room felt smaller suddenly. 11 months, Deborah said quietly. He's been in this building for 11 months. Long enough to learn the systems, Merlin said. Long enough to know which files to look for once Duval figured out the investigation existed. Deborah turned her chair toward the window. The Atlanta skyline sat under a flat, gray morning sky. She thought about the 3 witnesses. Geraldine Watson, pulled over 14 times on the same road. The business owner with the warrantless searches. Deacon Bernard, handcuffed on his own lawn. She thought about how long it had taken to earn their trust. How many conversations, how many assurances, how many times she had sat across from them and promised that this time it would be different. Their statements were the heart of the case. Facts and timelines and documented incidents were important. But human voices, real people saying this happened to me, and I am willing to say so in federal court, that was what made a civil rights case land like it was supposed to land. That was what made juries feel it. Without those 3 statements, the case was a body without a heartbeat. She turned back to the desk. "Where is Davis now?" Merlin's expression answered before his words did. "He resigned this morning. Effective immediately. Cited personal reasons. HR processed it fast. Unusually fast." He paused. "No forwarding contact information on file." Deborah felt the shape of it settle over her like a weight. Davis hadn't just deleted the files and hoped nobody noticed. He had deleted the files and walked out the door. Someone had told him when to move, had a resignation ready for him to sign, had made sure he was gone before the access log was reviewed. This had been coordinated down to the hour. She stood up again. She needed to move. "Get Bloom," she said. "Get the server team to document the full breach for the record. And I want Davis's personnel file, his system access history, every file he touched in 11 months. All of it preserved and flagged before anyone else gets near it." Merlin nodded and reached for his phone. Deborah walked to her office window. Below, the morning traffic was building on the street, ordinary and indifferent. She pulled out her own phone and opened Lara Clark's video. The clearest one, the one Lara had held steady from 15 feet away with grocery bags on the ground. She watched it again, Duval's hand closing around her wrist, his face certain and contemptuous and completely unaware of what he had just done. Zoe's face through the windshield. She watched it a second time, then a third. The office filled up around her through the morning. People came and went. Phones rang. Keyboards clattered. Deborah barely heard any of it. She sat at her desk and worked, methodically, precisely, building the secondary record she had promised herself she would build. Every move made against the case since Saturday. Every call to Bloom's office. Every planted media story she could trace back to a source. By 11 that night, the floor was empty again. Deborah was still at her desk. She turned off her laptop screen and sat in the dark. She did not leave for another hour. Deborah set her alarm for 5. She didn't need it. She was already awake at 4:40, staring at the ceiling in the dark with the particular wide-eyed alertness of a mind that had never fully powered down. She lay there for 20 minutes anyway, letting the stillness do what it could. And then she got up. Coffee first. Always. While it brewed, she pulled the kitchen table clear, moved Zoe's textbooks to the counter, stacked the mail, pushed everything to the edges, until the surface was bare and flat and wide. She worked better with physical space. Always had. She spread the printed files across the table in the order she had built them, oldest to newest, and sat down with her mug and the particular focused quiet of someone who had decided, somewhere in the dark hours of the night, that there was an answer in here, and she was going to find it before the sun came up. She started at the beginning. 3 months of casework laid out in front of her like a map. Documented stops, complaint records, settlement histories, officer profiles, and then the witness section, the part that Davis had gutted from the federal server. She read through the summaries she had written from memory the night before, reconstructing what had been deleted as completely as she could from her own recollection. She turned to the procedural records next. Federal protocol was detailed and specific about witness statements. She had followed it precisely, the way she followed everything precisely, because 20 years in federal law enforcement had taught her that the one time you cut a corner was the one time the corner mattered. She had documented every step, filing dates, authorization signatures, chain of custody records. And then she found it. She almost turned the page. It was a standard procedural notation, the kind of administrative detail so routine that it barely registered anymore. But something made her stop. Witness statement confirmation copies issued per federal protocol, retained by witnesses. She read it again. Federal protocol required that when a witness provided a formal statement, the receiving agent issue them a written summary, signed, dated, confirming the content of their testimony, a copy for the witness, a record they kept in their own possession. Standard procedure. So standard that she had done it without thinking, the way she did everything by protocol, and filed the notation without giving it another thought. Those copies had never been on the federal server. Davis had accessed the server. Davis had deleted every file he could find. But he had deleted the federal copies, the versions Deborah had uploaded, the versions stored in the building he worked in, the versions he knew how to find. He had not deleted the originals, because the originals were not in any building he had ever set foot in. They were in 3 homes in Harwick County. sitting in kitchen drawers and filing folders, and wherever careful, ordinary people kept the documents that mattered to them. 3 signed, dated, federally formatted witness statement summaries, one given to Geraldine Watson, one to the business owner, one to Deacon Bernard, each of them carrying Deborah's signature at the bottom and the full weight of federal documentation behind them. Davis had gutted the case. He had forgotten that the case also lived outside the building. Deborah sat back in her chair and looked at the ceiling. She allowed herself exactly one moment, just one, of something that felt dangerously close to relief. Then she pulled it back in, because relief wasn't useful yet. And she had learned a long time ago not to spend emotion before you had earned the right to it. She looked at the clock on the microwave. 5:47. She picked up her phone and called Merlin. He answered on the second ring, voice alert in the way of someone who hadn't been sleeping soundly either. "Yeah. The witnesses kept their copies," Deborah said. "The confirmation summaries we issued per protocol. Davis only deleted the server files. The originals are still out there." Silence on the line. She could hear him processing it. The same rapid calculation she had run an hour ago, arriving at the same place. "He didn't know about the confirmation copies," Merlin said. "Nobody thinks about the confirmation copies," Deborah said. "They're administrative. They're routine. They're exactly the kind of thing you forget about when you're moving fast and trying to cover tracks. So we still have the case. We still have the foundation," she said. "We need to go get it." She was already standing, already moving toward the hallway, already thinking about shoes and keys and the drive across Harwick County in the early morning light. "Get dressed, Terrence. We have work to do." The sun was barely up when Deborah turned the Tahoe onto Elm Grove Road. The neighborhood was the kind of quiet that belonged to early mornings. Sprinklers running, a garage door opening somewhere down the block, the smell of someone's breakfast drifting through a screen window. Ordinary, peaceful. The kind of street that looked like nothing bad had ever happened on it, which Deborah knew from 3 months of case files was exactly untrue. She parked in front of a modest tan brick house with a small garden along the front walk. Neat, tended. The garden had that particular careful quality that said the person inside paid attention to things, noticed details, believed that how you kept your space reflected something true about your character. Merlin glanced at her from the passenger seat. "You want me to—" "I'll take this one alone," Deborah said. "Wait here." She walked up the front path and knocked. Geraldine Watson came to the door in a housecoat and reading glasses, a coffee mug in one hand, and a paperback pressed flat against her hip. 67 years old, retired high school English teacher, silver hair cut close to her head. She looked at Deborah through the screen door for a moment, and then something in her face settled. Not surprise, exactly. More like recognition. Like she had been expecting this visit, or something like it, for longer than Deborah had been standing on her porch. "Agent Mosley Ward," she said. "I've been watching the news." "May I come in, Miss Watson?" She pushed the screen door open without another word. They sat at Geraldine's kitchen table, the same way Deborah had sat across from her 8 months ago during the first conversation, before the formal statement, when Deborah had simply listened and Geraldine had talked for 2 hours about 14 traffic stops on the same road over 3 years. Same table, same kitchen, same woman, who had decided once that she was tired of being quiet and had not reversed that decision. Deborah told her everything, plainly and without softening it. The server breach, Davis, the deleted files, what it meant for the case and what it meant for the people whose testimony had been targeted. Geraldine listened without interrupting. When Deborah finished, she was quiet for a moment. She looked down at her coffee mug, then back up. "So they went into a federal building," she said slowly, "found our statements, and deleted them. Because they were afraid of us." "Yes," Deborah said. That's exactly what they did. Geraldine was quiet again. Then something moved across her face. Not anger, though the anger was there. Something older and more decided than anger. "I have my copy," she said. She pushed back from the table and went to a kitchen drawer beside the stove. She came back with a manila folder, worn at the corners, that had clearly been handled more than once. She set it on the table in front of Deborah. "I've had it since you left it with me. I told my daughter about it, showed her where I kept it." She paused. "I wasn't going to let it disappear." Deborah looked at the folder, then at Geraldine. "I need to ask you something harder than keeping it," Deborah said. "I need to know if you're willing to resubmit formally and testify publicly in federal court, on the record, with your name attached." The kitchen was very still. "Miss Watson," Deborah continued, "I won't minimize what that means. I know what it costs to stand up in front of a system that has already shown you what it thinks of you. I know you've been brave once. I'm asking you to be brave again." Geraldine Watson looked at her for a long moment over the rim of her coffee mug. "Honey," she said, "I've been waiting 20 years for someone with a badge to sit in that chair and actually mean it." She tapped the folder with one finger. "I'm not going anywhere." The second visit took longer, the third longer still. But at each kitchen table, in each quiet home, Deborah told the truth and asked the hard question. And at each table, she received the same answer, shaped differently, spoken in different voices, but carrying the same unbroken core. "We're not going anywhere." By 10 in the morning, Deborah and Merlin were back in the Tahoe with 3 original signed statement copies on the back seat, and 3 brave people who had just agreed to stand in federal court and say their names out loud. Deborah looked straight ahead through the windshield. "Tell me about the dash cam," she said. Merlin pulled a small USB drive from his jacket pocket and held it up between 2 fingers. He didn't say anything. He just held it there, and the look on his face was the look of a man who had been sitting on something significant for long enough that the relief of finally putting it on the table was almost physical. Deborah took the drive, turned it over in her hand. "Talk." "The night after the parking lot," Merlin said, "I started going back through the lot's security camera network, cross-referencing angles, identifying every vehicle that was positioned close enough to capture the confrontation. Phone videos were already everywhere, but phone videos are shaky. People move, they react, the angle shifts." He paused. "I was looking for something steadier. The dashcam. A college student, 22 years old, was jogging back to his car on the east end of the lot when it started. His dashcam runs continuous recording, front and rear, and his car was parked at an angle that gave it a direct sight line to your Tahoe." Merlin reached over and plugged the drive into the port on the center console screen. Front camera. 43 minutes of footage. The confrontation starts at the 17-minute mark. The screen loaded. The image was sharp, sharper than anything that had been published online. Higher resolution than Lara Clark's phone video, steadier than the footage from the shopping center's distant security cameras. Deborah watched herself from a new angle. Standing at the back of the Tahoe, unhurried, Duval approaching across the lot with that particular heavy stride. She watched the whole thing play out from the outside, the way the crowd had seen it, the way it would look to a jury. It looked exactly like what it was. Duval snatching her credentials. Duval grabbing her wrist. Deborah's response. Fast, controlled, professional, completely proportional. Every second of it clean and visible and documented. "Watch the 18-minute mark," Merlin said quietly. Deborah watched. On the screen, the confrontation had ended. The patrol cars had come and gone. Duval was at his truck, smoothing his pullover, his officers around him. The crowd had thinned. Most people had assumed the situation was over and moved on. In the dashcam footage, Deborah was visible at the far left of the frame, turned away, making the federal notification call. Duvall pulled out his phone. The dashcam's forward-facing microphone was not designed to pick up conversation from 40 feet away. But the lot was quiet by then. The engine noise from departing patrol cars had faded. No competing sounds, just suburban Saturday morning. And Merlin had run the audio through forensic enhancement software twice. Deborah heard it clearly. Duvall's voice, slightly compressed by the enhancement, but unmistakably his. Flat. Quiet. Certain. "It's Ray. Get someone in that building. Find out what she's been working on. Do it tonight." 7 seconds of audio. Deborah reached out and stopped the playback. The Tahoe was very quiet. She sat with it for a moment, not performing calm, actually using it, the way she had trained herself to process the things that mattered before she decided what to do with them. 7 seconds of audio that placed Richard Duvall at the origin point of a federal server breach. 7 seconds that connected him directly to Davis, to Osborne, to the deleted files, to every move that had been made against the investigation since Saturday morning. 7 seconds that turned a civil rights case into a criminal conspiracy case. "How long have you had this?" she asked. "I identified the student through the security cross-reference 2 weeks ago," Merlin said. "I contacted him, explained the situation, and he voluntarily provided the footage the same day." He kept his voice steady. "But you were on suspension. I couldn't move on it officially without compromising the chain of custody. And I wasn't going to hand Duvall's attorneys a procedural argument to suppress it." He paused. "So I waited until you were reinstated, documented everything in the meantime, logged the contact with the student, the voluntary submission, the forensic enhancement process. Every step is clean." Deborah turned and looked at him fully. 20 years she had been doing this work. She had worked with a lot of partners in 20 years. "You've been busy," she said. Merlin held her gaze. "You told me to keep documenting everything." Deborah turned back to the windshield. The neighborhood outside was still and ordinary, and she sat in the middle of it holding a USB drive that contained the end of Richard Duvall's 30-year career and the beginning of his federal prosecution. She pulled out her phone and called Deputy Director Bloom's office. "Clear your morning," she said when he picked up. "And call Washington." She ended the call before he could ask questions. He would understand soon enough. The conference room on the 4th floor of the FBI Atlanta field office held 6 people and enough tension to fill a building twice its size. Deborah sat at the head of the table, Merlin to her left, Deputy Director Bloom directly across, his reading glasses on for the first time all morning. 2 federal prosecutors, both from the Atlanta DOJ office, both of whom Deborah had worked with before and trusted, had their legal pads open and their pens moving before she finished the first sentence. And at the far end of the table, a woman named Sandra Avery, senior attorney from the DOJ's Civil Rights Division in Washington, who had flown in the previous evening on a red-eye and looked like she hadn't slept and didn't need to. Deborah had spoken to Avery at 6:30 that morning. She had needed exactly 12 minutes to get her on a plane. "Let's go through it," Deborah said. She laid it out in order. Clean, documented. The way she built everything. From the ground up, nothing assumed. Every claim supported before she moved to the next one. 3 months of civil rights investigation into the Harwick County Police Department. The confrontation. The OPR review. The leaked investigation. The server breach. Kenny Davis. Patrick Osborne. The familial connection. The deleted witness statements. The 3 original physical copies, recovered that morning, now in federal evidence bags on the table in front of Sandra Avery. And then Merlin plugged in the drive. The room watched the dash cam footage without speaking. When Duvall's voice came through the conference room speakers, "It's Ray. Get someone in that building. Find out what she's been working on. Do it tonight." One of the federal prosecutors stopped writing mid-sentence. The other looked up slowly from his legal pad and exchanged a look with Avery that said everything it needed to say. Bloom took his glasses off and set them on the table. Avery had not moved. She was watching the screen with the focused stillness of someone mentally constructing a federal indictment in real time. "Run it again," she said. Merlin ran it again. When it finished the second time, Avery looked at Deborah. "The chain of custody on the dash cam footage is clean? Every step documented," Deborah said. "Voluntary submission by the vehicle owner, logged contact records, forensic enhancement process filed, no gaps." Avery nodded once. She looked at the prosecutors. Something passed between the three of them that didn't require words. "What are we charging?" Bloom asked. Avery opened her folder. "Assault of a federal officer. The wrist grab, 4 camera angles, 30-plus witnesses, no ambiguity. Obstruction of justice, the server breach, the dash cam audio connecting Duvall directly to the instruction, Davis's access records, the Osborne familial connection, and federal civil rights violations, the pattern or practice case, now fully restored with the original witness copies, and 3 witnesses prepared to testify publicly." She looked up. "We charge the network simultaneously. Duvall, Osborne, Davis. All 3 at the same moment, so nobody warns anybody." "How soon?" Deborah asked. "Today," Avery said. "This morning. Right now." The arrest teams deployed at 9:47. 3 teams, 3 locations, moving at the same moment, coordinated by radio, so that no phone call from one address could reach another in time to matter. Deborah was not part of the arrest team that went to the Harwick County Police Department. Federal protocol and the nature of her personal involvement in the case required that separation, and she respected it without argument. She stood in the Atlanta field office and listened to the radio communications instead. With Merlin beside her and a cup of coffee she forgot to drink going cold in her hand. The first call came from the Harwick County PD at 9:51. Subject is in custody. Richard Duvall had been at his desk in full uniform when the federal agents walked through the front door of his own department. He had been walked out of the building in handcuffs, past his officers, past his civilian staff, past the front desk where a young receptionist stood, with both hands over her mouth. 3 news cameras were positioned outside the building. How they came to be there at that precise moment was a question nobody in the field office asked Deborah directly. Patrick Osborne was arrested at his county hall office at 9:52. Kenny Davis was taken from his mother's house in southwest Atlanta at 9:54. Still in the city, he had told his employer he was leaving. 3 of Duvall's officers were formally suspended pending federal review before noon. Deborah's phone rang at 10:15. She looked at the screen. Lara Clark. She answered. "Is it real?" Lara's voice was barely above a whisper. Deborah looked out the window at the Atlanta skyline, bright and clear under a wide October sky. "It's real," she said. The flight to Washington was smooth and quiet. Deborah had a window seat, which she always requested and rarely used, but today she watched the Georgia landscape fall away beneath the plane. The sprawl of Atlanta giving way to red clay hills, then flat green distance, then clouds, and let herself be still for the first time in weeks. No files, no laptop, just the hum of the engines and the pale October light coming through the scratched oval window. She slept for 40 minutes. The first real sleep she'd had since before the parking lot. The meeting was in a conference room on the 7th floor of the DOJ building. Not a grand auditorium, not a ceremony with flags and cameras. Just a room with a long table and good coffee, and people who understood what the work actually cost. Sandra Avery was there. Deputy Director Bloom had flown up that morning. Two senior attorneys from the Civil Rights Division sat along one side of the table with folders open in front of them. A man Deborah recognized from a joint task force 3 years ago, Jacob Beck, Deputy Chief of the Civil Rights Division, stood at the window when she walked in and turned and shook her hand with both of his. "Sit down, Agent Mosley Ward," he said. "We have some things to give you." The formal letter of commendation was read aloud first. Not a summary, the full text, every word of it. Deborah sat with her hands folded on the table and listened without expression, while the room acknowledged that she had conducted herself with exceptional professionalism under sustained and deliberate institutional pressure, had protected the integrity of a federal investigation against coordinated interference, and had delivered a prosecutable case without a single procedural breach. Bloom watched her from across the table the entire time. When the reading finished, he gave her one small nod. She returned it. Then Beck opened a second folder. "There's been a conversation happening at the division level for some time," he said, "about the need for a dedicated federal unit focused specifically on pattern or practice investigations in the Southeast. Local civil rights cases that fall between the gaps, too big for county oversight, not quite reaching the threshold that typically triggers federal attention." He slid the folder across the table to her. "We'd like you to lead it." Deborah opened the folder. 12 agents. Expanded federal authority. Direct line to DOJ leadership. A mandate to pursue exactly the kind of case she had been building in Harwick County. The ones where the abuse had been running for years, insulated by relationships and NDAs, and the quiet confidence of men who believed they were untouchable. More cases. More Duvals. More fights. She read the scope document fully before she looked up. "When do I start?" she said. Beck smiled for the first time all morning. "We were hoping you'd ask that." She landed back in Atlanta at 6:15 and was home before 7:30. The house was lit up from the inside, warm yellow light through the front windows, the sound of music coming from upstairs, the smell of something Zoe had attempted to cook drifting under the front door. Deborah stood on the porch for just a moment before she put her key in the lock. She breathed in the ordinary evening air of her own street. Then she went inside. Zoe was at the kitchen table in an oversized sweatshirt, laptop open, textbooks stacked beside her in the organized chaos that was her natural habitat. She looked up when Deborah dropped her bag by the door. "How'd it go?" "Good," Deborah said. She hung up her jacket. "Really good." Zoe studied her mother's face with those sharp, seeing eyes. Then she nodded, satisfied with what she found there, and turned the laptop around without another word. "Read this," she said. "It's the final draft." Deborah leaned against the counter and read. The college essay was about a parking lot, about a Saturday morning that was supposed to be ordinary and became something else entirely. But it wasn't about fear, or not only about fear. It was about watching a woman stand completely still while everything in the world demanded she move. About what it looked like when someone knew their own worth so completely that no amount of noise from the outside could shake it loose. About wanting to carry that stillness into a courtroom someday, into a career, into a life. She didn't raise her voice once, Zoe had written. She didn't have to. She already knew who she was. Deborah read it twice. Her hand found Zoe's shoulder, rested there. "It's good," she said. Her voice was steady and quiet and entirely certain. "It's really good." Zoe grinned. "I know." Deborah closed the laptop gently. She pulled out the chair across from her daughter and sat down. No files, no phone, no clock. Just the two of them at the kitchen table. And all the time in the world. If you enjoyed the story, leave a like to support my channel. And subscribe so that you do not miss out on the next one. On the screen, I have picked 2 special stories just for you. Have a wonderful day.